Hey everyone, it's Ashley. Welcome to my channel. Today we're making a memory quilt. Let's do it. For this project, you're going to need t-shirts, you're going to need some kind of background fabric, your basic quilting supplies like quilting rulers, a rotary blade, you're going to need a sharp pair of scissors for applique, and you're also going to need some Heat and Bond Light, which is an iron-on adhesive that you can sew through, and there'll be a link in the description box below with all of the supplies that I've used. You're also going to need the memory quilt pattern that I purchased off of Etsy. After purchasing the pattern, I saw that I needed 24 t-shirt blocks for the pattern, and after going through the totes that my customer gave me, I pulled out anything that I couldn't use, any kind of heavy flannels, the really slinky kind of polyester material. I didn't want to use that. When you're using t-shirts in a quilt pattern versus just cutting out the t-shirts and sewing them together, you really need to be mindful of the material that you're using, because it has to be used differently. You're going to be quilting over it. You don't want to use the big thick materials or anything that's going to slink around too much. So these are the t-shirts that I pulled from the container bins, and this is what I'm going to use. There's 12 shirts here. I needed 24 blocks, so I'm going to use about 2 blocks from each shirt. And by using more than 1 block from each shirt, it kind of adds to the cohesiveness of the quilt. All of the colors that I've picked are pretty much the same kind of tone. There's nothing too bright, nothing too bold. Everything kind of blends together, and I think once they're cut, it's going to look good. Next step is to cut out our t-shirt. So I have my ruler, I've got my shirts, I'm cutting 2 blocks per shirt. And for this one, I'm kind of fussy cutting over the G. I want to keep that in the middle of my ruler, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to line up with the stripes on the shirt, which makes it super easy. You definitely want to kind of have a reference point as you're cutting. You want to keep the G in the middle, and then you can kind of turn your ruler to one way or another to keep that center point there. So all I'm doing is kind of making sure this G is in the middle of my block, and then you can see the stripes, and I'm kind of taking the stripes and aligning them with the lines on the ruler, which is kind of difficult to do, especially with stretchy t-shirts. Blocks kind of get a little wonky, so it's really important to take your time cutting and making sure that you're cutting straight lines, because if you end up cutting your block like this, you're going to really be able to tell, and it's going to look weird, in your end result. So I'm going to cut this. I'm pretty happy with the centering of this part, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it. I have a second cutting mat underneath this side of the shirt, so I'm not cutting through both shirts. So I still have the whole back that I can use. I try to leave as much of the shirts as I can. So usually I'm kind of going to a back corner where I can get enough room. So I'm aligning the edge of my ruler with this white line right here. And I lost there it is. So here's block number 2. And then we move on to the next shirt. I'm finished cutting out my blocks. I've got them all here. Now the next step is to trace the hearts onto the Heat and Bond, and then we're going to fuse it to the back of these shirts. I've got my hearts traced out. There's 3 sizes. There's a large, a medium, and a small. And now we're going to take these over to the ironing board. For this step, I use the Heat and Bond Light, which is one of my favorite products, and there is a link in the description box below. So we're going to take all these over to the ironing board. We're ready for the next step. I'm at my ironing board now. I've got my hearts traced out of the Heat and Bond. And then I've also got my stack of t-shirts over here, and these are the same shirts that we used to cut the blocks out of earlier. So now we're going to put these each on the ironing board, and I'm going to put probably 2 small hearts, a medium sized and a large size on each shirt. Please remember, we are fusing to the back of the shirts, which is really important. I'm not being super selective as to where the hearts are going. I'm kind of facing them in different directions because I think that's going to be kind of neat in the overall look of the quilt. So fuse these to the back, and then we're gonna take our time cutting them out in the next step. So now we have all of our hearts fused onto the backs of our shirts that we use to cut the blocks to. And the not so fun part is cutting all these babies out. The next step is to fuse our hearts onto the centerpiece of our white fabric. Now with this, I've already ironed it. I folded it twice and ironed it to find the center point. I'm working on the floor to have more room, and I have my heart template laid out. At this point, I'm trying to find the center point. So as you can see, the top of the heart and then the bottom of the heart to where it comes to a point, that's the center of the heart. So I'm going to align that with the center crease that I've already made on my white fabric. And I'm just taking my time and making sure that everything lines up and it's nice and smooth. I can't fuse these twice. So I'm taking my ruler over to the side and seeing how much room I have, just like I said, just making sure that it's nice and centered. I think this is good. I think I'm happy with it. So I'm gonna leave it like this, and I'm gonna start putting in my hearts and kind of seeing what they look like. So once you take the backs off of these, they're not super sticky. Well, they're not sticky at all, actually. So when I'm getting ready to fuse, I like to go ahead, if the back will come off, that'd be great. I like to go ahead and take the back off and just get it out of the way. And then it kind of stays put. It's not sticky, not sticky at all. Now we're gonna take our time and lay out each of these hearts and find the placement that we're happy with. I'm okay with it. I think if I start to mix around too much, I'm gonna start seeing patterns next to each other, and I definitely don't want to do that. So now I'm gonna throw all this paper away and take my iron and slowly work my way. I guess it doesn't matter, but so here is what we have, and I think it looks super cute. So now we need to stitch all of these in, and I'll talk about how to do that next. We're back at the sewing machine. Well, we haven't been here yet, so. We're ready to sew the hearts on. They've already been fused, but now we need to stitch them in. Yeah! So, let me fix him here. For this part of the project, I am top stitching all of the hearts in. I'm not doing a zigzag stitch, I'm just doing a straight stitch. This is how I do all of my applique. It's called raw edge applique. After you wash your project, you get a little bit of fray on the outside edge, and I really like that. I do that with my name quilts, and I think it gives the quilt a lot of character. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm really taking my time going through each heart. I've sped this up a little bit. This process kind of takes a while. Take your time. Try to stay as close to the edge as you can. This is what you should have. You should do this with each of the hearts. I'm going to go through and finish all of this, and I'll meet you back here. I've got everything stitched in. All the hearts are stitched. I've pressed this really well, so at this point, I'm going to set it to the side, away from my baby, so we can move on. It's day 2 of our memory quilt. I have all of our blocks laid out, and I think I'm ready to sew them together. So I'm going to show you what I have, and then we're going to go to the sewing machine. This is the layout that I've kind of chosen. The pattern kept telling me to get 24 squares cut out. However, I'm only counting 6, 12, 18, 19, I'm only counting 20. So maybe they just wanted me to have some extra just in case. I guess that gives me more room to play with the placement. However, I think this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to sew this side first together, and then this side first together, then this one, and then sew them to the middle piece, and we'll be back. I'm at the sewing machine now, and I'm just gonna put 2 blocks at a time, right sides together, making sure to match up the side corners. With regular quilting, I don't usually pin. And I don't use clips, but for t-shirt blocks, I definitely do, because they are Much easier to mess up. Another tip that I found when working with patterns such as plaids and stripes is if you've cut your block correctly, you should be able to sew exactly down one of the lines and maintain your seam allowance. And then when you go to open it and press it or put it into the rest of your quilt, your block is really straight and you can see that. If you didn't cut correctly, you're definitely going to see your pattern is cockeyed when you get to the end point and you see the rest of your quilt. I'm going to work to finish sewing all the rows together, and then we're going to meet back and talk about how we clip it to our centerpiece. Next, I am very carefully pinning the top and the bottom block sets to the heart that I created earlier. So I've already done the bottom, and now I'm going to work on the top. So keep in mind that the heart is directional. You know, this is the top of the heart, this is the bottom. So your blocks, if they need to be facing one way, make sure they're facing that way, if that makes sense. Just do a test run, line up your edges, and then flip it over and make sure the designs are facing downward or, you know, whichever way. So I'm gonna start with this corner and pin it, and then go to the other corner and pin that. I'm gonna take this to my sewing machine and get this sewn and come back and pin the sides. And then at that point, we just have to attach borders and we are done. Be right back. The t-shirts are attached to the center. And now we are ready for the borders, which I'm so excited to see this quilt come together. It's looking really great. I'm super excited. A word of caution at this point, if you did not use stabilizer on your t-shirt blocks, they can really stretch still. So until you get the borders on, be really careful moving this around or stretching it or flipping it around or whatever you usually do with quilt tops, because it still can kind of stretch out of shape and your quilt's going to be missized. So just be careful. But I'm going to get these borders put on and we are done with this quilt top. Our quilt top is finally put together and it's so beautiful. I'm going to share a video of this in just a minute, but first I need to quilt it, so I'm going to get my backing ready and load it onto my long arm machine. From here, I'm just doing an all over meandering line. This is one of my favorite things to quilt, on t-shirt quilts specifically, because it's super simple and it keeps the emphasis on the t-shirts. It doesn't draw attention to the quilting. It's keeping the t-shirts kind of the star of the quilt, which is what I love. I'm so excited to share the end result of this quilt. It turned out absolutely beautiful. The quilt blocks look great. The heart placements look perfect. Everything kind of came together really nicely. I reached out to the customer with a picture and asked her, what do you want from the backing? So she, together, and I kind of went back and forth, and she finally decided on a beach theme, which was so special. She's told me that her husband and herself were going to retire at the beach one day. I also used one of his t-shirts as the quilt binding, which turned out really neat. Thank you so much for following along as I created this quilt. I hope it helps you in the future to make your own memory quilt. You can find me on Instagram and feel free to leave any questions and comments below. And then don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more tutorials in the future. Thanks, y'all.